So hello, I'm Jess. I am the volunteer host today, and with us we've got Alex, Ian, Terri, Clare, and Jacqui. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Yep. And today we're discussing, and I've got a copy of it here, Diary of Somebody by Brian Bilston. He is described by many as the poet laureate of Twitter due to his use of social media to share his poetry. And poetry features throughout the book, which we'll discuss in a bit, I can imagine. And the fictional Brian starts his diary with the intention to write a poem a day. Okay. And I've just written down, there's a note here that the blurb describes it as part tender love story, part murder mystery, and part coruscating, which is a new word to me, description of a wasted life. So if we start and we go around, and maybe you could just give some initial thoughts, if it's something you'd usually read, and if you enjoyed it without getting into too much detail. So if I start with Alex.
This is a quite weird one for me, because what the blurb described it as murder mystery, which is what I normally read on a regular basis. But I didn't get to the murder mystery part because I gave up by March, because I thought this sounds silly, because one of the reasons I found it silly is because he was moaning about this guy with low numbers on Twitter, and I've got 1,000 followers myself, and I don't even have to try to get that. So why is he moaning? Because all you have to do is follow people, and you'll get followers back. You know,
yeah, okay.
It's not complicated, and the book just seemed a bit dry. I mean, I've done writing groups myself, and it was March, which is about an hour into the book, and nothing had happened. I mean, if the murder gets interesting, fair enough, but I think, as I say, it didn't get that far. So
okay. Ian?
Yeah, I didn't love it. I did read all of it. I just felt he's probably better off on Twitter, really, because there was no plot, really. The murder mystery was just kind of pasted in, probably because his editor said nothing's happening, you need to make this a bit more interesting. There were too many poems. I love poetry, but that made it worse because he was kind of defacing well-known poems by making them funny with his wordplay. And I just needed more from him than clever wordplay, some of which was clever, but I needed more from it than what he was giving me.
Terri?
I was most disappointed. The one positive thing that came out of it is that I have challenged myself to write a poem a day, and thus far I have succeeded. However, back to the book. The preview did it a great disservice, I think, and like Alex, I was looking forward to, a mixture of poetry and murder mystery. In that respect, I think it failed miserably. As a novelist, I think he's a non-starter. So didn't enjoy it. I had to limit my reading of it. So I'd read perhaps a couple of months at a time. And then to avoid falling asleep, I just had to stop, I'm afraid.
Okay, Clare?
Well, I agree with everything that's been said before me. I felt that he wanted people to read his poetry, and he couldn't get people to read his poetry, so he had to write a book. Okay. The book was fairly boring, and what I did was I read a month a day. And then he just invented some very loose story to go around all these poems he had. I wouldn't recommend it at all.
And Jacqui?
Yeah, so he either goes out and gets somebody to publish his poems, or he sticks to Twitter, as somebody said earlier.
Yeah, I believe he has had a book of poems published, has he not?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jacqui, have you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to go completely against the grain. I really liked the book. I thought it was very easy to read, very quick. And for me, in January, which is a pretty crappy month with miserable weather, miserable days, it really cheered me up, actually. I laughed a lot and I bought his book of poetry, which has equally made me laugh. Yeah, it's a very loose story. The poems break everything up, and I don't think I took it seriously. I just enjoyed it. I just thought it was an easy read and it was funny, and it just made me laugh. You know, the story of the man down the road who couldn't seem to get his bin bags out on the right day at the right time and came running out in his dressing gown was just something that was very familiar, just something that's an everyday funny occurrence. So yeah, I enjoyed it.
You know, I suppose for most of us, if we wrote a diary entry a day, we perhaps wouldn't have a lot to put in most of the time. So
well, that's the thing, yeah. But the mundane things of life, the everyday things, can be funny, you know, if you just capture them right and just see the lighter side of it, then yeah, they can be quite entertaining.
I think that was my problem with it, because I was flatly comparing it to Adrian Mole and the funny bits in that, and the fact that there wasn't enough novelty, there was no Pandora to care about, there was no you didn't care for any of the other people. In fact, you thought the guy who was complaining about was a knob. So yeah,
I wondered what the bin man had to do with it later on, because he had this bin man, and then he had obviously had the story that eventually comes out that I think he kind of put in as a secondary thing. And I think, well, where's the man with the bin? He's got to come into this murder mystery, but he doesn't at all. He sort of just abandoned.
The only bit was that he became the man that forgot to put the bins out as his life unraveled.
Yeah. But no, I think if you enjoyed his poetry, you might enjoy the book.
Yeah, maybe if you were a follower of him on social media and you kind of knew where he was coming from, it would be something that you'd enjoy in a different way.
Yeah.
Right, should we move on to some sort of prompted questions? First bit I was thinking about was sort of in poetry. Is anyone here usually reading poetry? I think Ian said you quite like reading poetry. Anyone a fan of poetry particularly? It's something that you read?
Well, I enjoy it, and I enjoy writing poetry, and I think it you know, we are unique, and how we are perhaps feeling at any particular time is portrayed in that poetry, most of the time unintentionally, of course. So I you know, it can be very inspiring. And what is a poem? I believe a poem is a thought from the heart, and no one can really criticize it. And here I am, but I'm not criticizing his poetry as such. I'm criticizing the book.
Yeah, the place of the poetry. Because sometimes, like, I'd skim read the poems rather than actually reading them because I didn't really know what to do with them in the story.
I think some of them were, you know, not just witty, but they were quite clever. I particularly enjoyed the one on the exam relating to Shakespeare. You know, he'd obviously put a lot of thought into that and played with ideas and so on.
Yes, I think if you took all the poems out, you could put them in a separate book, and I'd have read those, and I'd have probably been very happy. But to tell me that I was going to read a story, no. I think he needed to just stick to just his poems, basically. And
I think the trouble with that is there are too many poems in there which are actually well-known poems by famous poets like, you know, Auden and such like, and he's kind of rewritten.
Oh, he can't use them.
Probably not. I don't know where he'd stand with that, but you know, it was a difficulty for me because there were a lot of poems in there that I really do like, and I just found it quite offensive that he felt he got carte blanche to re-engineer them as funny poems when most of them weren't really intended to be funny, and he was doing things that really aren't new. I mean, Roger McGough's been doing that sort of thing with poetry for over 50 years probably, and Spike Milligan before him. And, you know, you can play around with words fine, quite clever, yeah, but it just fell completely flat for me because I take poetry a bit more seriously than that, I'm afraid.
Do you think he got commissioned? Do you think someone saw all his Twitter things and actually commissioned him to write the book?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
I think that happens a lot these days. People on social media get book deals because they know that there's an audience for it.
Yeah.
So.
I thought Alex's point was interesting about comparing it to Adrian Mole or Bridget Jones.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, I haven't read much of those, but has anybody sort of read them? And as Alex felt, they were sort of much better at engaging the reader.
Well, years ago, I read Adrian Mole, and I would agree that Adrian Mole is much better read. I haven't read Bridget Jones's diary. Wasn't Bridget Jones's diary originally done as a series of diaries in a newspaper, and then put together? So but I can't imagine these, you know, this standing alone on its own. So no, I think Adrian Mole was a lot better story.
Yeah, I think, as Alex said, there were characters in there that you engaged with, and I just didn't really engage. I certainly didn't engage with the poet particularly because he was annoying. But the other characters were very flat. You know, I felt, having had a teenage son of that age, I felt his relationship with him was unrealistically good.
That's true.
You're going through all my points now.
Oh, sorry.
Because the next bit I was going to move on, I might start with Jacqui now, so she gets a turn to say, you know, obviously a lot more positive about it. Did you like Brian as a character?
Yeah, I did, because there's a lot you can relate to with him, really, because he's just a sort of struggling guy who just wants to be what he wants to be, but life kind of gets in the way. So, you know, he wants to just write poems and kind of be in his own little world, but, you know, you can't do that because he's not making money from it. He's not making a living. So he's just sort of struggling through, and he struggles with relationships. You know, he's sort of on the outskirts of things and not really clicking with people, but also recognizing that he needs to do that. So he's kind of trying to balance everything out. So yeah, you know, I could find him quite a likable kind of character. It is not whatever normal is, if you like. You know, he's a bit unusual, but and his approach to relationships and his approach to life. But yeah, he was I thought he was likable.
Anyone join in with some other comments?
I cannot say that I liked him. I felt pity for him, and he's obviously in, you know, a lost person, and it's, you know, I agree that he shows his struggles that millions of people can empathize with. So for that aspect, then he is sharing his, you know, his inner self. He's brave enough to do that. But there were times when I felt that I just wanted to take him by the shoulders and shake him.
tell him to do something, like, you know, just make your mind up and go and do that. You know, when he got on the bus with Liz, you just sort of like, well, just listen to what she's saying, come on.
Yeah, his relationship with Liz was quite disappointing, really, because he never really did get off the ground, did it?
No.
And it could have done. You know, there was interest there quite clearly, but so whether he just genuinely didn't recognise that interest, or whether he was being defensive and not able to take the plunge because it scared him, I don't know, but it never did really go anywhere.
I think he did actually, Jacqui. I think at the end he didn't get on the bus, and then he ran for about 5 stops and got on the bus. So I think he did actually take the plunge
At the end.
At the end, yeah.
Hopefully so. Yeah. Hopefully so.
And I was going to say, like, what did Liz see in him?
Good question. I think he's a sensitive person, and you know, I can relate to that. I think that is quite engaging. But yeah, I think probably she sort of felt he was somebody she could improve on, you know, and
I suppose they've got poetry in common to start with, haven't they?
Yeah.
But yeah, when they first go on the date, it's only a couple of months in, isn't it? When he's been very mopey about everything, so he didn't seem particularly a dateable person at that point. As the title is like Diary of a Somebody, when do you think he became a somebody? Which point in our story?
Well, everybody is somebody to somebody else, so it's a bit of a subjective title. You know, even though I thought he was a bit of a guy that was chasing something that was very difficult to get to, and a bit too worried about what social media thought of him. I thought, as long as you got people that care about you, anybody can be somebody to somebody else. It's just it could have played on that more with the titles, but especially at the beginning. Maybe if he had, maybe I might have got further into the book a bit. I don't know.
Well, he solved the mystery, I suppose. He sort of figured out where Toby Salt was. And I did quite like the policemen, actually. I found them quite funny. So yeah, that is one, that strand of, although it was very contrived, I thought introducing the policeman was quite a good move, and I thought he did sort of make them quite amusing.
And they're questioning him on his poetry rather than the case.
Yeah, that was quite funny, really. Yeah.
I think in relation to the somebody aspect, we are indeed all somebody. Yeah. But I see him as a guy who was searching for his true self.
Yeah.
And for me, that is where the somebody, he's almost screaming, look, I am somebody. And you know, he desperately, I believe he desperately wants to have a relationship with Liz, and she is open, but he stops because he fears attachment. And you know, will it fail? And that's his biggest stumbling block, I find. So perhaps the title Diary of a Somebody is most apt.
Yeah.
So for me, I think the Diary of a Somebody came about because he wanted recognition for his work, for his poetry. He was constantly looking at Twitter numbers, Twitter feeds. It was like needing an acknowledgement, and that sort of came about in a roundabout way when he wrote another book which was completely in a different vein to his normal kind of work, but it was a success in terms of sales, in terms of revenue, but not what really laid that comfortably with him, because it wasn't really his thing. but it brought him success. So in that way, he becomes a somebody in a commercial sense, which leads to changes in his personal life, in how he sees himself and how he feels.
Did anyone else get to the bit where he just goes that there's money in his account and he can pay off some debts, and just go, wait, what? Where did that come from?
Yeah, I just didn't understand that, because it was quite a lot of money, wasn't it? About 10 grand or something that he'd frittered away, that the poetry club had saved for their trip to France, and then suddenly the money arrived in his account, and we've no idea where that came from, have we?
Not until
I
later
thought it
on.
came from- I thought he wrote-
France.
I thought he wrote a book that was
Yeah, I just mean
He
my
wrote
misunderstanding.
romantic
yeah.
fiction, didn't he? And I thought that's, well, you know where he tore off the pages in his diary?
Yeah.
I thought he used that to start his writing when he was on holiday because he didn't have any paper. Am I wrong there?
Yeah. He wrote the romantic fiction, didn't he?
Yeah.
But he didn't say that that's where the money came from. So you just get the diary entry that he got the money and he could pay him back, and you just sort of like, oh, okay, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I gleaned from that. That's where that came from that book.
Yeah.
That he wrote in those 2 weeks when he kind of disappeared off the scene. That's what he was doing.
Yeah.
Because he mentions that there's this romantic novel in this place they're staying. It's the only thing he can read. So he reads it, and then he realizes he can write it himself.
Because he found it easy to do that, I think.
Yeah.
Just to revamp something else.
Yeah.
And then Ian touched on it earlier, but in the sort of his son Dylan, did we think he was a realistic teenager? You actually wanted to revise for his GCSEs.
I just felt that he would have been a lot ruder to the author, and not really sort of playing along with sitting on the sofa watching old movies and stuff. I just can't see how that would work. You know, I suppose it was quite funny when he took him to football training, and Dylan turned into this sort of motivator of the team. But I didn't find that relationship convincing at all.
The one bit I couldn't do was like when they were on holiday and they couldn't get the Wi-Fi. I can't imagine a teenager going on holiday and being okay, all right, there's no Wi-Fi, we'll get on with it then.
Yeah.
No, that's very important.
The football was quite funny for me, because I thought, how many teenagers do you know that would be quite happy to keep losing 8-0 and keep going? And it's not realistic to think that you'd keep wanting to go to get your ass kicked.
Well, later in the story, Dylan turns it all around by emulating his stepdad and becoming a sort of motivational type person. Although obviously the stepdad comes to a sticky end at the end of the book.
Yeah, I think the teenage boy, you know, initially is very, very influenced by that stepdad, isn't he? That is this massive Mr. Motivator, and you know, initially it's a great thing and it influences him a lot, and then after a time, like a lot of these sort of motivational speakers, they become an annoyance, and they drain you rather than inspire you. So that sort of realism sunk in, and it's like he'd had enough of this man who was always positive and always had to be the best at everything, and just wanted to be just relaxing with his dad and having a normal kind of Sunday, not feeling like he had to overachieve with everything, just going back to being a normal teenager again.
I see the son as a rescuer. If we take the stepfather and his work out of the picture for a moment, it's almost as if father and son swap roles, and the son becomes the adult, because there are many instances throughout the book where Brian presents as an adolescent himself. You know, he's almost going through the adolescent phase again, which, you know, adolescents go through. Who am I? What am I doing here? I don't, you know, believe anything my parents say about the world, etc., because they're finding their own way. And I think he desperately wants to be able to help his father find his way back.
I think he says something, doesn't he? I can't quite remember what, but it tells them that he can do things, and like, you know, just, you know, he does give his father a like bit of a motivational speech at one point, doesn't he?
Yeah. Some of the motivational things he comes out with are quite funny, actually. The little sort of motivational mantras that he comes out with.
And I think with the sort of stepdad Stuart, and then you got Toby Salt, who's obviously got people around him in his life that are doing well, supposedly, and like he feels sort of inadequate, I think, some of them, which is part of why we've got this book, where it's like, you know, he's becoming somebody that he wants to be.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm coming to the end of my points. I mean, I did ask, like, you know, about comparison to Adrian Mole, but I think we're all sort of, you know, those of us that know Adrian Mole would be say it's not really comparable. If anyone wants to comment on that.
Well, that I agree with Alex. The more I read of the book, I'm thinking, you know, that this is far inferior to the likes of Adrian Mole and Bridget Jones. And there were aspects where I was reminded very much of Blackadder and Mr. Bean. You know, some of the chapters were just very silly, but there were elements of cleverness there.
Yeah, I find that if as a regular reader who reviews, I find that if you can't find something good in a book, then a lot of the time it's, you know, there's a good element in every book if you just work out why the authors wrote the book, and you can, you know, there's always something good to say. And if there isn't, then don't bother coming on and saying it. And don't be rude for the sake of it, you know.
Yeah.
And I think we're all of the same mind in this group. Yeah. I think we're all like that. So
I think if you were one of his social media followers and you really enjoy what he writes, you'd probably pick it up and quite enjoy reading it, because it'd be, you know, continuation of that.
Oh, he's a clever writer. This, you know, his wordplay is very witty and interesting, but it for me it just wasn't. I would not call it a novel. To call it a novel is a bit misleading. I think it's a miscellany.
It's a very different format, I think, to anything that I'd read before. Actually, it's not your traditional novel. It is definitely, and you can pick it up and put it down, pick it up and put it down. You don't have to.
Yeah.
Which was partly probably why I liked it, because it was January, and it is January, and I suppose for me I quite like the lightheartedness of it.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't serious. You know, I'm reading other books at the same time that take more out of you. So that was just my nice little bit of. It was just a bit of sunshine in the January gloom, really.
Yeah.
So has anyone got anything else that they'd like to say about it? Any other points?
I was just wondering what does everybody else read as a palate cleanser? That, you know, what would other people recommend as their palate cleanser, so that, you know, kind of thing.
What, as a sort of a read which isn't too demanding?
Yeah.
Right. I don't really read that sort of thing, I'm afraid.
I like Matt Haig. Have you ever read?
Yeah.
That's light-hearted. Matt Haig's quite. Maybe you could try that.
Yeah.
I read a lot of literary fiction normally, so when I want something lighter, I usually go leave it at home and go and get a YA book and go for something really simple that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, so like Me Before You or something like that is a bit kind of like different than the usual kind of thing.
Mm.
Yeah.
so if we want to wrap up here, should we go around and give it how many out of 5 we'd give it this month? So I'll go the same way. Alex?
I'd say 2.
2. Ian?
Yeah, I'd go for 2 as well.
Yeah, Terri?
2.
2. Claire?
2.
2. And Jacqui?
I think I'll go for 4.
Yeah, good for you.
Yeah, I was around 2, 3. Like, I didn't absolutely hate it, but I didn't entirely enjoy it. It sort of was, I was only reading it because we were doing the book club today.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I think that is it.